What if I told you that deep in the African wilderness, a lioness defied nature's laws to seek help from a human? This is the extraordinary tale of Alina Morgan, a wildlife photographer whose life was forever changed by an unexpected visitor on her doorstep. On the edge of the Kruger Reserve, where wild nature collides with the calm of solitude, something unimaginable occurred. One dawn, a lioness with 2 cubs appeared on the wooden deck of Alina Morgan's white cabin, her amber eyes filled not with menace, but with a plea. It was a moment that would test the very boundaries between human and wild, trust and fear, survival and compassion. At 34, Alina Morgan had chosen a quiet, self-reliant life, far from the bustle of Johannesburg. Her cabin stood in the buffer zone bordering Kruger National Park, surrounded by ancient mopane trees and grasses that whispered with the wind. A wildlife photographer by trade, Alina's days were spent documenting the fragile beauty of Africa's wilderness. Each morning she rose with the sun, brewed her coffee, and sat on her broad wooden deck with her camera beside her. It was her ritual, her sanctuary. One October morning, after the spring rains had painted the landscape lush and green, Alina froze mid-sip. Emerging from the tree line was a young lioness, her golden coat flecked with faint spots of youth. The lioness paused in the clearing, eyes sharp, ears pricked, every muscle taut with alertness. Alina's hands shook as she raised her camera, capturing frame after frame of the wild queen before the animal vanished silently into the brush. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it left Alina trembling with awe. Lions, wary of human habitation, almost never approached cabins. This was not ordinary. Over the next week, the lioness returned, always at dawn. Always emerging from the same cluster of trees, Alina, from behind her lens, noticed the thinness of her flanks, the faint ribs showing beneath her tawny coat. This lioness was struggling. Perhaps she had been pushed away by larger prides, left to fend alone with cubs too young to hunt. Against the warnings engraved into her mind as a conservationist, Alina followed her instincts. She left small portions of meataways from naturally deceased antelope she found on the reserve's edge far enough from her cabin not to invite danger, close enough for her to observe. At first, the food vanished in the night, stolen by hyenas or jackals. But on the 5th morning, Alina's heart pounded as she watched the lioness creep forward, sniff the meat warily, then devour it in seconds before slipping back into the bush. From then on, feeding became a cautious rhythm. Alina was meticulous. Never too much, never too often. Just enough to supplement the lioness's failing hunts. She wrote long emails to Dr. Marcus Hale, a wildlife biologist she trusted, asking about ethics and risks. His reply was cautious but not condemning. If you do this, do it sparingly. Never invite her closer. Maintain the line between observer and participant. So Alina did. Their relationship, if it could be called that, was built on distance. A fragile bridge of respect. By November, the lioness's visits grew more frequent. Sometimes she lingered in the clearing after eating, sitting in the pale morning light. Once, she even stayed as Alina stepped quietly onto the deck, their eyes locking in a wordless exchange before the lioness turned and melted into the forest. Then came the paw, print small, clumsy impressions beside the lioness's. Alina realized the truth. The lioness had cubs. She never saw them directly, but she knew. And suddenly, every glance, every cautious visit, held new weight. This was not just survival for one lioness, it was the survival of her family. December's rains grew heavier, and in January a violent storm struck, unleashing torrents of water that turned the landscape into rivers of mud. For 3 days, Alina stayed inside, winds howling around her cabin. She thought constantly of the lioness and her unseen cubs, wondering if they had found shelter. When the skies cleared, Alina placed food in a small 3-sided shelter she had built at the edge of the clearing. Fresh tracks appeared the next morning, proof the lioness had survived. But the paw marks were different, uneven, and the tiny cub prints were missing. Alina's chest tightened. Something was wrong. The answer came the next morning with a sound that froze her blood. Scratching, not birds, not wind. Something deliberate. She looked out-hand. Her heart stopped. The lioness stood on her deck. At her feet lay 2 cubs, their fur sodden with mud. One squirmed weakly, nudging the other. The second lay still, breathing shallowly, its hind leg twisted unnaturally, blood dried around the wound. The lioness looked straight at Alina, amber eyes burning with desperation. Then, astonishingly, she stepped back, giving space. Alina's tears blurred her vision. Against every instinct of the wild, this mother had brought her cubs to her seeking help. On the phone, Dr. Marcus's voice was urgent. This is unprecedented. If she has placed her cub before you, she must be desperate. Move slowly. Use gloves. Wrap the cub in a towel. Bring him here immediately. Elena's hands trembled as she prepared. Leather gloves, soft towels, a pet carrier. She set meat at the far end of the deck, hoping to distract the mother. Then, heart pounding, she stepped outside. The lioness growled low, pacing, but she did not attack. Her gaze flickered between Alina and her cub. Gently, Alina wrapped the injured cub in a towel, didn't resist. She placed him into the carrier, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The lioness made a strangled roar of anguish but did not stop her. Within minutes, Alina was on the muddy road, her SUV rattling toward the Kruger Wildlife Recovery Center 3 hours away. The cub, whom she would later name Cairo, silent except for ragged breaths. At the center, veterinarians worked for hours. Cairo had a complex leg fracture, hypothermia, and malnutrition, but he was strong. Against the odds, he survived surgery. For weeks, Alina drove back and forth, checking on him. She watched as the staff carefully limited human interaction, feeding him with long tools, playing sounds of the wild to preserve his instincts. But despite their efforts, Cairo grew accustomed to humans. By March, Dr. Whitaker, the lead veterinarian, delivered the verdict. He cannot be released. He has lost the essential fear of people. He would not survive in the wild. The words crushed Alina. She thought of the lioness, still visiting her cabin, sometimes sitting for hours, calling in the night, waiting. She had promised to bring him back. Now she knew she never could. Alina faced a choice. Either Cairo would go to a distant sanctuary or she could apply for a home-based rehabilitation license. It's an intensive process requiring training, certification, and the construction of a secure enclosure. She chose the latter. For months, she studied lion behavior, nutrition, veterinary care. Contractors built a vast enclosure beside her cabin, trees, rocks, even a small artificial stream. By April, it was ready. When Cairo finally arrived, 6 months old and strong, Alina watched with tears as he stepped from his transport crate into his new home. He sniffed the trees, tested the water, climbed rocks. His limp was faint now, barely noticeable. One dusky evening a week later, the lioness returned. Alina stood frozen on her deck as the lioness approached the enclosure. For the first time in 4 months, mother and son faced each other. Through the mesh, Cairo pressed forward. The lioness sat down, eyes locked with his. For long minutes they stayed like that, silent, unblinking. Alina wept. She had not returned him to the wild as promised. But perhaps she had kept the spirit of that promise alive. From then on, the lioness visited regularly. Sometimes she circled the enclosure, sometimes she lay in the jacaranda shade watching him. She never came to the cabin again, never blurred the boundary between wild and human fervor. But she did not abandon him. As seasons passed, her visits grew fewer, as nature intended. Yet even a year later, Elena's cameras caught her patrolling near the property, sometimes pausing by the fence, as if checking on her son. By then, Alina had finished her 3rd photography book, filled with images of Cairo and his mother. She often thought of that stormy morning when the lioness had placed impossible trust in her. She had not delivered perfection. Cairo was not wild nor entirely free, but he was alive, safe, strong and, still connected, however faintly, to the wild mother who had refused to give up on him. The true gift, Alina realized, was not Cairo himself. It was the lioness's trust that had changed her forever, showing her the fragile line where compassion and wilderness meet. And sometimes, at dawn, when the jacaranda blossoms glowed purple against the golden grass, Alina glimpsed a familiar shape at the tree line. The lioness watching her son, watching the woman she had once chosen, against all instinct to believe in.